So yeah, morning everyone. Thanks for joining. This is our third Control or Innovate technical webinar and our actually second in a series of Intune, because after the first one we realised there's a lot more to unpack around Intune. So yes, we've got Jhonny again joining us today. If you want to go to the second slide, Jhonny. So just a bit of housekeeping again. If you joined any of the first two, your microphones are muted and cameras are off, just to kind of keep the webinar flowing smoothly, but we really do encourage interaction and questions. There is a Q&A box at the top. There's also the chat panel. I'll keep an eye on both of those. If you've got any questions throughout, please do chuck them in there. If they're relevant, I'll kind of jump in and ask Jhonny at the time, or we'll have time for a bit of a Q&A at the end. So that's literally it from me. And I'm going to pass over to Jhonny to run today's session.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. I can see there is a lot of familiar faces from our first session. As David mentioned, this is the second in the series for Intune, the first one based around giving an overall overview of Intune, which we will do in a smaller aspect, but it was more based around devices and deploying devices to the environment utilizing Autopilot. On the back of that session, we had a lot of questions in regards to apps deployment, security, managing your data, and that's why we've decided to do a follow-up session based on apps specifically. Should hopefully not be as long as the first session. But what we will be doing today is we'll go over Intune, give it a quick look through Intune. We'll discuss app stores, packaging apps into stores, deploying apps, what strategies there are to deploying the apps to the environment, and best practices. We will then talk about security. How do you protect your apps, your data? And then we'll have a demo scenario at the end of the session where we'll try to tie everything that we've discussed into a recorded demo that we'll try to do. It's not live, but it's a configuration on a test environment of everything that we've discussed so far. I hope that's where you get the most out of today's sessions, where you can actually see the configuration. And as we always say, these sessions are not meant to be a low-level technical walkthrough. It's more of a quick overview. Hopefully, if you are using Intune, it will show you new things that you perhaps overlooked, that you weren't aware of. And if you are looking to start using Intune, this will hopefully show you what you can do and the possibilities that there are with Intune. Now, in terms of Intune, what is Intune? Basically, Intune is a cloud-based tool that is part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. It allows you to manage your apps, your devices, and your end user access to your corporate data from anywhere, be it in your office, remotely from home, or any country around the world. You can think of it as like the central hub of your apps and your device ecosystem, the command center of your operations in a way, right? You can basically control everything from a single dashboard, who accesses your apps, keeping them updated, and protecting your data across your environment. It can be on personal devices and obviously your corporate devices as well. Now, as part of Intune, there are three main pillars. The first of those are your devices, which again is where we focus a lot of our first session on. If you do want to learn more about it and you missed the first session, I believe we've attached the recording to the event invite on our page, so you can always go back and rewatch that. We go over managing the complete life cycle of your devices. We configure and go over configuration, compliance policies, managing BYOD devices, and how you can control the full life cycle of a device, accessing the resources within your environment. The second pillar is your identity, which is at its core, what ties everything together in Intune, right? It allows you to manage access to your apps and your devices, ensures that only trusted and compliant users can access your applications, your data, your services. You can enforce policies such as MFA, and it allows you to protect your environment from authorized access to apps and devices. Now, identities, we talk about identities on both devices and apps. We probably won't be dedicating a session to it because we talk broadly on both sessions, and we will talk today on it. But think of identities as VIP passes, right? You wouldn't let just anyone into your exclusive club, which is your corporate data. So with identities, you can basically manage who accesses your environment. And then we have apps, which is where we're focusing on today. This is where you can configure, you can deploy, manage the apps across your environment. You can keep your apps secure and your data secure with app protection policies. You can ensure that only compliant devices and users can access your sensitive apps and data. And you can make sure that these apps are automatically updated, be it on the stores or if it is a custom line of business app. And again, if there is an issue with an user, a device is lost, or a user has left, you can actually wipe your corporate data from those devices without touching the personal data on a personal device, or you can completely reset and remove all your data from corporate devices that have been lost or users are refusing to hand back in a way, right? Um, so that is Intune in a nutshell. Again, if you want more of an insight of everything, and we talk about how to access Intune, we have navigational tips. You can watch our first webinar, which we go more in depth, and we have a little demo on how to do that on that session. But based on today, I'm in a privileged position where I work as a consultant for Curve Transform, and I get to interact with a lot of businesses, be it small startups to enterprise environments with a lot of devices, a lot of users and apps. And you'll be surprised the number of businesses that still manage apps deployment manually. They install these manually, they update them manually, and it can be quite a laborious task, right? Going around updating all of these devices. But the irony is that a lot of them do have the license available on their existing environment, and just looking into it and just testing it can improve their lives 100%, 100 times over. So with Intune and apps management, it can just turn that manual grind of installing, updating, and keeping on top of your apps into an automated and secure process. Now, a lot of the questions that we get when talking about apps is how do we make sure that apps um, are either installed, managed, and updated across not just one device type, a lot of different devices, iOS, Android, Windows, macOS devices. How do we ensure that our data on these apps are secure, whether again it's a corporate device or it is a personal device? This can obviously be done with app protection policies. You can encrypt your data, which we'll go into today. How do we keep apps up to date? Whether you've done it via a store or whether it's a line of business apps, how do we keep these apps up to date? And lastly, how do we protect that sensitive data, specifically on personal and BYOD devices? Because what's happened, and it's been over the last 3 to 4 years since COVID started, a lot of companies quickly ramped up into remote work for obvious reasons, right? And a lot of that boundary that you had previously on your office, where you had your on-prem servers, your data were located locally, you had your firewalls, your network, everyone came into the office, your data was contained in your network boundary. But now with everyone working from home on corporate devices, mobile phones, your data can be anywhere. And it's important to make sure that that data can be kept safe. And that's one of the biggest oversights that a lot of organizations have today, that they allow anyone access to the data on personal devices, but they don't actually protect that data. Nothing is stopping them from downloading files to the personal devices, to Dropbox or different cloud backup systems. So that's hopefully what we'll go over today, and give you different options to protect your environment and your data. Now, much like devices, an app has a life cycle. Now, a few years ago when I started in IT, as I mentioned, I was juggling multiple devices, be it laptops, mobile phones, there was even tablets, where I was installing apps manually, updating the apps manually, uninstalling, building. It felt like a job of in it itself. And depending on the size of the organization, it can be quite a laborious task. When I came across Intune, it wasn't just a small shift in the way that I work personally. It was a complete game changer. Intune just allowed me to avoid having to install and update and keep on top of each individual app that's installed across the environment on all our devices. It was just, as I said, a complete life changer for me personally in the organization that we were working at. And that's what I hope you can get out of this session today in terms of your app management. What this slide does, it represents that journey, right? From adding the app to retiring it. Uh, and that's what we will cover today, the life cycle of apps managed end to end through Intune. So this starts with obviously adding the app to Intune. This can be via the stores, be it the Microsoft, the Apple, or the Google Play Store, or it can be a line of business app that you will need to package that's not available on the stores. We then configure that app to ensure the app functions properly within your organization. We'll then protect that app by either encrypting the app or the data within it, and applying security controls on who can access that app via compliance policies. We then assign that app. It can be to users, a group of users or devices. It can be dynamic groups, or it can be user-based assignments to target specific regions if you have multiple offices across the world. And then we start deploying that app, and we need to think about, how do we deploy it? Do we just push it down automatically to a group of users, to all users, or we make it available to them via the company portal app that they can access and download at their own leisure when they need it? Once we've deployed the app, we then go into the monitor and manage stage, which obviously we monitor to make sure that the app is installing successfully, whether there is any issues with compliance with users accessing the app, and obviously keeping on top of those updates, making sure that the app is regularly updated and the overall health of the app is where we want it to be. And that will eventually get to the retirement phase, which is when the app has either got a brand new version and you're going to install a brand new version of the app, or you moved on to a different type of service or app. And that's when we start looking at revoking access to the apps that are no longer needed, and we can actually wipe the app, remove it remotely, and remove all the data associated to that app from our corporate devices and personal devices that you've made available to users. And what this is the complete Intune app lifecycle, right? From start to finish, Intune manages the entire lifecycle efficiently. It just allows you to, obviously, from the moment you configure it, that's when you probably will spend the bulk of your time configuring your environment. But once it's done, and once you've got it ready, it's just a hands-off approach, and it allows you to, instead of focusing on maintenance, you can focus on innovation, right? Looking at different aspects of your business where you can improve your processes and the way that you go around it. In terms of app stores and packaging in Intune, the deployment of the apps. How do we configure these apps? Managing apps used to mean that IT departments were, as I said, manually installed the app and updated on every device, which was extremely time consuming and prone to errors. But with Intune, we can now streamline that process across different platforms and sources, whether it's a Microsoft Store, the Google Play Store, or even a line of business app, a custom app that you have an EXE or an MSI for that you can package and configure on Intune. There are three key aspects on deploying apps within Intune. The first of them is the app stores with Windows, the iOS, and the Android that allows you to configure, assign, and deploy apps that are available on those stores to the devices. Um, Anything that you can find currently on your Apple iOS device store or even the Google Play Store, you will be able to find it on Intune. And with the Microsoft Store, it is getting better. And I can see a lot of apps are now appearing, which makes our lives easier. The only grift that I have with it is that they decided to remove every other browser and pushing us to use Edge, which now is forcing us to having to package Google Chrome and Mozilla. But I guess it is Microsoft trying to push us down the path of using Edge. But what it does is it allows you to install apps and not forget about it, but it allows you to install the apps and push them down and just take a hands-off approach because the apps update themselves. As the apps are updated on the stores, those updates will be pushed down to the devices and your apps will be kept up to date. Now, what happens if those the apps that you need to deploy to your devices are not available on the Google Store or the Microsoft Store? That's when we start looking at other types of apps. That can be a web link to a SaaS environment that you need to drop down a link to the user's desktop that they can just double click and go to a SaaS environment. It can be built-in apps or line of business apps, such as custom apps or finance apps, HR apps that are not readily available on stores. You can still deploy those apps as long as you have the executable for those apps, and that can be done by packaging apps into Intune. Now, we are not focusing a lot on packaging apps on Intune today because that's a whole topic in of itself, and we are going to be doing a whole session, which we don't have a date yet, but we'll be doing a session on packaging apps, not only for Intune but other type of apps such as Citrix. And we will talk you through and walk you through the process of doing it. But in a nutshell, you can prepare any type of application as long as you have an MSI file, a Win32 executable, or whether it will be an APK, an API file. You can package those using something called the Intune App Preparation Tool. It is basically a PowerShell script that you run, and it asks you what is the app. You go and you enter the location of the app in the executable, and then it asks you for an output location, and then packages the app for you, and outputs a package file that you can then upload to Intune and configure and deploy to your devices. Now, with packaging, it's not as simple as using apps that are readily available on the stores, because those will come pre-configured with installation prompts, uninstallation prompts, and obviously the version control and all of that. When you package apps in Intune, you need to make sure that you have detection controls in place and rules. This can be by setting up a specific folder that you know it will create within the C drive that you can ask Intune to keep a track of, and you can enter that detection rule. And once it detects that that folder has been created, it then marks the installation as complete. Or you can do registry keys based on registry entries that it will make once the app is installed. You will also need to make sure that you have an uninstall capability in place. Most apps will have an uninstall.exe that you run. You just need to make sure that you point the configuration to that file. So whenever you're ready to uninstall that application from the environment, Intune can automatically go to that file and uninstall the application for you. And obviously, you need to make sure that you test, test, and test. And I say that for a reason. With line of business apps, you need to make sure that A, is technically viable. So we always recommend you do a technical acceptance test with your technical staff, whoever is deploying the app, to make sure that it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. You then do a user testing with a group of users that will actually be using the app. And once that's gone through, then you can obviously make sure that you then deploy it to a broader spec. And this is not just installing, but making sure that the detection works correctly and that you can actually uninstall the app. But as I said, we'll be focusing more on packaging on a different session. We don't have a date yet, but as soon as we do, we'll make sure that we make you all aware of it. With the deployment out of the way, how do we actually deploy and push these apps down once we've configured them to the devices? There's two different ways that we can go about it. Now, when you think about installing an app on your phone, it's just a tap and there you go, it's installed. But behind the scenes, it's obviously a lot more involved when you deploy the same app across an organization with different devices and different device types. It isn't as simple as just tapping and it's installed. So that's where obviously Intune comes in. That helps you take the guesswork out of deploying apps to different groups and users, and ensures that they're installing it without having to manually intervene on the installation of those apps across the devices. Whether users need an app right away, or you want to silently install it in the background, or you make it available to them to go to the company portal and download at their own leisure, that's where Intune can help you with the deployment of these apps. And the first deployment decision that you'll need to make is whether it will be on demand or automatic. Whether you want to automatically push this down to the users, or you want to make them available on the company portal app. We'll go in detail on the demo that follows these next couple of slides, where we actually give you those options and where you can configure them. We can then group our we can look at a group assignment, whether you want to do it in test groups. It will be a user-based installation, whether you have an HR app that you want to deploy to the HR users or the finance users, and obviously based on device, whether you have Windows devices, Mac OS, iPhone, and Android, you can assign the groups and deploy the apps based on those different criteria. And the last of those is version control. Again, with store apps, those will be updated automatically. If it is a line of business app or a Windows Win32 app that you configure through Intune, you need to make sure that you keep on top of those versions. If there is a new version that has been released, those apps will need to be replaced on Intune. That won't be done automatically. Thankfully, if you do the configuration the first time, you know the configuration that needs to be done. You can just replace the Win Intune file that gets created via the Intune preparation tool. But that's something that you will need to keep on top of with line of business apps. And in terms of best practice, obviously, I've mentioned it earlier. We normally recommend you roll out in phases on a TAT, UAT testing phase. You then do a phase rollout and then a production rollout. We then look at monitoring. So once you start installing those apps, you can look at Intune reports to help you make sure that to give you the visibility into the apps installation, making sure that they're actually being installed successfully. If there are issues, and Intune sometimes is not very clear in what's causing the problem with the app being installed. You can actually go to the local event viewer of that device to see what's causing the issue when the app is being installed. If you have Power BI dashboards, you can integrate that with Intune to keep a track of your app's installations. And if you have log analytics, the same thing can be done. And lastly is apps assignment using dynamic groups. Typically, this will be based on regions. If you have different regions with different language requirements for apps, you can build dynamic groups based on those, or group tags based on those locations and the language for those apps, specifically for Office 365. You can build dynamic groups and assignments within Intune and enter ID to deploy those devices to the users without having to worry too much about uh, that they gain the right app for the region. Um, Basically, with Intune app deployment fits your organization in a way like a glove, right? It's customized and efficient. You can change it. You can configure it to ensure that you make the most out of it, and it fits your organization and your requirements. Once you've configured your app, you've obviously agreed on your deployment strategy, you've tested the app. How do we protect um, the apps and the data within those apps? And this is where app protection and security policies come into place. Now, with today's workforce being remote and hybrid, with a mixture of people working from the office and home, with personal and corporate devices, protecting the apps and the data that they handle is probably the most important thing right now. It's no longer about just installing the app. It's about ensuring that the app remains secure and compliant throughout the life cycle. And Intune allows you to do this in three key areas. The first of those is with app protection policies, where Intune let us enforce our protection policies to keep our corporate data safe, even on personal devices. We can implement data encryption to control how data flows between apps and enforce compliance policies and requirements for those apps. This can be done on four core components. This is with compliance requirements, where you enforce policies based on compliance, whether the app will need a PIN before you can launch it, and whether encryption is enabled on that app. You can do data encryption to encrypt the data at both rest and transit. You can do data control. You can restrict data being transferred between managed and unmanaged devices. You can keep your data within your Office 365 bubble, not allowing users to copy and paste your data outside of those apps, or transfer or back those data up to unmanaged apps. And then obviously, once uh, either the device has been lost or the user has left, you can selectively wipe that data or remove that corporate data and your apps from any device and personal devices, which is the main reason why you want to make sure that app protection policies are in place. The third key area is conditional access. And with conditional access, you can define policies that allows you to control which devices and users can access the apps based on real-time monitoring. Intune can block access to an app if a device or user doesn't meet the compliance criteria. This can be MFA, or it can be based on the user's location. You can restrict access to your apps if users are connecting from outside of the UK, as an example. And this can be done, again, based on conditional access policies, where you can keep a track of the users in real time and the compliance when accessing your environment. You can do access control, which allows you to make sure that the device that they're connecting into your environment and your apps is a compliant device based on your compliance policies and whether they're accessing with MFA. as an example. You can make sure that you continuously monitor the app usage and enforce policies dynamically. And lastly, you can do location-based access, restricting access from countries that you don't operate in or high-risk countries that a lot of the breaches come from. And the last key area is threat protection. And threat protection ensures that our apps are shielded from external attacks in a way, right? Through malware detection, vulnerability patching, and enforcing conditional app launch. Intune basically helps you prevent non-compliant and compromised devices from accessing and launching our apps. Now, this can be done with conditional app launch that allows you to configure how that app is launched, whether they will need a PIN to access, how long they have access to your apps and your data if the device was to go offline, and when you can wipe that device if it exceeds a period of time from that device being offline and your data is removed. Those are local conditions that you apply to a device before they go offline. And it's like a ticking time bomb, right? You can select if the device is offline for 30 days, remove the app and remove the data from the device. We'll go a lot more in depth on it on the demo and where you can see the options that you have available to you. You can make sure that the app integrity is enforced throughout the devices that have been installed. This can be done by only allowing trusted apps to be installed via the verified app stores, and you can block unverified or risky apps from being installed in your environment. You can integrate your devices with Defender for Endpoint, which will scan apps from malware and any I'm lost with of any access that you do not that you not do not want to be accessing your environment, so you can block them from launching Word documents with background processes via Outlook, and you can block them from launching Adobe PDF files that run child processes in the background. I think Defender for Endpoint will be possibly a session in of itself that follows up in our Intune series, where we will hopefully go through the different areas that you can configure and protect your environment. And lastly, you got your vulnerability patching, where you can make sure that your apps are updated with the critical updates and the security patches that are released. With these three key areas, and I apologize, I jumped ahead, you can make sure that your Intune ensures that you have robust security features and you can rest that your data is protected within your environment, and it can be from anywhere in the world, right? It can be from your office or it can be remotely. And lastly, we'll go on to the demo scenario, which we will go back to the initial challenges that we presented in the session, which is how do we manage app across different devices and platforms. We will be deploying Microsoft Teams to iOS and Android. We will be configuring a compliance policy for iOS to ensure compliance when accessing our environment. And we will be configuring a MAM policy to protect our sensitive data on mobile and personal devices. Now, this session that follows is a recorded session. It's about 50 minutes long. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop it on the Q&A session, and I'll be able to answer it as the demo is playing, or I'll address it at the end of the session.
So here we are on the Intune portal. We'll be going over to apps, which is where we'll be doing a lot of the work today for the demo scenario. If you do need a bit of an overview on how to access Intune, how to navigate through and what each section does, please check out our first webinar where we take you over Intune and the portal as a whole on that session. Now, as part of the requirements for the demo scenario, we will be deploying Microsoft Teams to both iOS and Android. Now, what you want to do is you want to go to all apps and add app. On here, you have the store apps, which we mentioned earlier during the webinar. And you have the ability to deploy Office 365, Edge, Defender for Endpoint, web app applications, which is basically the links, web links to devices, or the other section, which is anything else that's not found within the stores or this drop-down area. You can package and deploy to Intune. That can be a line of business app, a Win32 app, any macOS PKJs, and obviously Android APKs as well. We'll be dedicating a full session to app packaging and deployment. So watch out for that event and invite. But for today, we'll be deploying Teams on iOS first. So what we do is we select iOS Store app, and we go over here and we search for the app. Now, this is the app store on any iOS device. I typically would select the location of where the device will be installed, which is the UK, which applies the language-based settings for those apps. And obviously, there are different apps that are only available on different countries. So we'll be deploying Teams via the UK App Store. So we look for Teams, we find it, and we select. On here, it pretty much fills it all up for you. The only two sections that you need to pay attention to is the minimum operating system, which we normally recommend to be 2 steps below the latest release. And you can select the category, which will be the productivity. You can make the app be shown as a featured app on your company portal app on a mobile device or web address or the web portal for the company portal. And you can change the logo if you like. We'll keep it as it is for now. We then look at the assignments. Now, the assignments will be very similar across the board for all apps. You have required, which basically installs the app automatically to the device that you've assigned it to. You can make it available to enroll devices. So any devices that are managed through Intune, it will be available to them on the company portal, so they can navigate to the portal and they can download the apps that are made available to them. Or you can make it available to devices that are enrolled or not enrolled. So this is going to be your BYOD devices, right? So if you want users on personal devices to download the company portal app, log in and look at the apps that you've made available to them, you can do so. For now, we will assign it to all users and all devices. Then we go on next. We can review our settings and we'll click create. There we go. Now, the reason why we will be doing an Android install as well is because Android is a little bit different to iOS in a sense of you don't have the ability to search the store. But what you can do is you can actually search for the app on the web, so on the Google Play Store, grab the link for that app, which is Microsoft Teams. You then place the App Store URL on here. We can enter a name, which is Microsoft Teams. I typically like to copy and paste the about this app on the description. We need to set the publisher, which is Microsoft, and similar to Android, similar to iOS, you can select a minimum level. Let's set Android 10 as an example for now. We'll set it as a productivity app. You can show it as a feature on the company portal as an example, and you can select an image, which I've downloaded a couple of them. So I'm going to select that one. And you can add a logo to the app. This will typically for the company portal. So that's why it looks when the users are looking through the list of apps. And again, we'll make it required to be installed automatically to all users and all devices. And you have the same options to enroll and available to enroll devices and available to non-enrolled devices. We click next and create. So that's our two apps installed. Again, there is a lot more that we can do with it. There's a lot of different options. We will be focusing on packaging apps on a different session. But for now, we've configured themes for Android and iOS. We will now be setting up a compliance policy for iOS devices. So this is to make sure that any device connecting to your environment, if you made the app available through the app deployment to not enrolled devices, you want to make sure that at least the devices connecting to your environment are compliant to your policies, or at least a base rule of policies. So Contoso iOS compliance policy. On here, there are many different options. You can configure whether you want to allow users to set up a personal email address on the devices. This is more for managed devices because we're setting this compliance policy with a BYOD aspect in mind. We'll just simply block jailbroken devices from connecting to your environment, and we want it to be at a medium level of device threat, which is typically the OS version of that device. You can set a minimum OS of the device connecting to the environment if you like. If you've deployed Defender for Endpoint on iOS devices, you can select the risk score. Because we haven't done so for this session, we will avoid making that change now. We'll probably be focusing more on Microsoft Defender for Endpoint on subsequent webinars. It's a whole topic in of itself. And devices that are connected to the environment, we want it to be required to have a password to unlock the device. We want to block simple passwords, which is your 111, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. We want the password to be 6 as the minimum length. We normally will not recommend changing the required password type or the type of password or numeric characters on a password, because for iOS, as an example, the lock screen normally requires a numeric password. So if you leave it as not configured, what it will do is it will use the device's default password type to be unlocked. We want the password to be required immediately after the screen locks, and we want the screen to lock after 5 minutes of inactivity. Now, we need this password to expire every 60 days, and we want them to prevent using the last 10 passwords that they've used. Now, a nice feature is restricted apps. So if you have BYOD devices connected to your environment with a specific app that you do not want, as an example, Dropbox, we can say if a device has this app installed, it will be marked as non-compliant. How do we do that? So there's a nice site called appsearch.co, and you can search on here for Dropbox as an example. Just grab the name of that app. You need to be very careful with the name. It needs to be exactly the same as it would be on the device, and you want the app bundle ID as well. And what that means is if any device connected to your environment has Dropbox installed, it'll be marked as non-compliant. And after a certain period, which we'll set next, they will be blocked from accessing your company app and data. We go on next. This is when we start making the device non-compliant. We don't want it to be marked non-compliant immediately. We want to give the users 14 days, as an example, to fix the non-compliance before they are actually blocked from accessing the environment. What we do want to do is we want to send an email to the user immediately, so on day 0, alerting them that the device is non-compliant and to contact the IT support team. If you do need some assistance on setting this up, the first webinar that we've done, we've gone over that. I highly recommend you check her out. Once that has been set, we want to assign this to all users and all devices, and we create our compliance policy. With that set, we now need to protect the data within our managed apps. And to do that, we'll set our protection policy, a MAM policy for Android. Now, the reason why I'm doing one compliance policy for iOS and then a MAM policy for Android is because both policies are extremely similar. So we will be doing the same thing twice for both. So we'll do a MAM policy for Android. We'll call it Contoso Android MAM. We go on next. We want to target all the Microsoft apps, which is where all our managed data is on Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, Outlook. So we want to protect all of the Microsoft apps. You can protect all apps that you've deployed to the environment. That includes Sage and Google Chrome, Adobe, whichever apps you deploy that made available through Intune. We'll keep it simple and do all Microsoft apps. Then we go on next. We want to block data being backed up to the Android backup services. We don't want our data to be living our little bubble, our little environment. We don't want to send any of our data to any other apps. We want to contain it within the Microsoft apps. We don't want to receive data from any other apps. We're basically creating a bubble here. And we want to restrict copy, paste, and cut from our apps to other apps. So our data is contained within the apps themselves. We want to block screen capture. It doesn't actually block the ability to use it. It just means whenever they use it, there will be a black screen. We don't want to be looking at approved keyboards. It can cause a bit of a headache when you start doing tablets with different docking stations that have different keyboards. It can be a bit of a nightmare. So we'll leave that as not required. We want to encrypt the organizational data 100%. So this is going to be for BYOD and managed devices. The data within the apps, your organizational data will be encrypted. And you can actually enforce the encryption of data within enrolled devices. So that means the whole phone will be encrypted, but those are phones that are managed by your organization. So we'll leave those two options strict. And the next thing, we want to block the syncing of policies to native apps and add-ins. We'll block printing. You can allow it if you like. We'll block it as an example. And we want to restrict web content transfer with other apps. We want to create a bubble here. You can allow organizational notifications, so data organization notifications. So these are the pop-ups that appear on the phone. You can allow those, or you can block them. We'll block them as an example for now. And if you have a VPN tunnel within your Azure environment, you can start the tunnel with the connection to the app. That means whenever someone actually opens up the app, it will create a tunnel to your Azure environment, and it will come from that location. So basically, the data access will be restricted within your network boundary. We haven't created a VPN tunnel, so we'll keep it as no for now. This is very self-explanatory. Is the PIN access for the app. So whenever the app is launched within the device, whether it will be managed or non-managed, there will be a PIN that they need to enter before they access the app. You can set those, and again, you can read through them. We'll keep them all as default for now. And you can also set the users to require them to sign into their account whenever the app is launched. I will not recommend running these two simultaneously because they can overlap, and they will overlap. So whenever Teams is open, they will have to enter the PIN, and then they will have to enter their password to their account to access the environment. It's a bit of too much authentication, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of complaints from users. So I'll use either or. Normally, I recommend the PIN to access the apps, but you can do logging into their account, and obviously, if you have MFA enabled, there will be challenged there as well. We'll keep it as a PIN for now. And it will recheck for inactivity every 30 minutes. So if there is no activity, it will recheck access requirements after 30 minutes. And the last bit that we need to look at with our protection policy is your conditional launch. Now you can set a max pin attempt of 5 or any number that you like. And after that, the user will need to reset the pin to the app in order to access it. You can allow offline grace periods for access of data. And obviously, after 19 days, you can completely wipe the data on that device. If they haven't checked in after 90 days and the device has been offline for 90 days. And obviously we'll be blocking access. You have other options in here, which is if an account is disabled, it'll automatically wipe the device. You can set working times and you can set minimum app versions. We'll keep it as default for now. This will set a nice little standard for our environment in order to protect our data, specifically on BYOD devices. We will choose to include groups, and this is very different to any other configuration within Intune. You can't select all users and all devices. You will need to select different groups. You can select all of them if you have them. If you have a group called all users, you can do that. However, I highly recommend that this is something that you target and you roll out on a phased approach, because you can stop a lot of people from doing the day-to-day work, or not stop from doing it, but learn a new way to work within your environment. For now, let's do an example of setting this to the Contoso team. We'll go next. We can review our settings and select create. And that's our app protection policies created, our MAN policy for Android. It'll be very similar for iOS. Thank you very much.